According to top negotiation experts, the single biggest mistake you will make in your next salary review happens before you even open your mouth.
Yeah, that's completely true.
I mean, it happens the moment you convince yourself that asking for more money is basically a tug of war.
It is a totally natural response, though, you know.
Yeah.
We are sort of conditioned from day one to view any discussion about compensation as this fierce battle over limited resources.
Right, like there's only so much pie.
Exactly. But approaching a formal salary review as a zero-sum game is, well, it's exactly what guarantees you'll walk out of that room disappointed.
Absolutely. And today, we are completely dismantling that combative approach. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at a stack of sources from top career coaches, organizational psychologists, and negotiation experts.
And the goal here is to really decode the exact timing, the mindset, and, the precise phrasing you need to comfortably ask for a raise and actually get it.
Yeah, we are not just giving you a list of scripted things to say. We're going to look at the underlying mechanics of how these conversations actually work behind closed doors.
Because the psychology of workplace negotiation is, frankly, it's fascinating. When you understand what is happening in your manager's brain, the entire dynamic just shifts.
I completely agree. And that actually brings me back to that tug-of-war concept I mentioned. I was reading through our sources, and there's an analogy that completely reframed this whole process for me.
Oh, the kayak analogy.
Yes, negotiating is not a tug-of-war. It's like driving a two-person kayak. Think about the mechanics of a kayak for a second. If you and your manager are both in the boat, right?
Right.
And you start violently paddling in your own direction, trying to basically overpower them, you don't get to your destination faster. The boat just spins in circles.
Until you eventually capsize the relationship. It's a great point. If you realize that you are both simply trying to strategically steer toward a shared destination, which is the success of the business, well, you aren't fighting anymore. You are navigating.
I love that. But, before you can even get in that kayak with your manager, you have to do some prep work. The sources make this really compelling argument that the negotiation process actually comes in two distinct phases.
And the first part has absolutely nothing to do with your boss.
Right. It's what they call the mirror. I was so struck by this idea that the first person you have to negotiate with is, well, yourself.
It sounds a bit abstract, I know, but the mechanism behind it is heavily rooted in behavioral science. It is about overcoming your own internal objections before you even step into the room.
Because if you walk in harboring imposter syndrome, they can just sense it, right?
Subconsciously, yes. Humans are incredibly adept at reading micro-expressions and body language. If you hesitate when stating your value, mirror neurons in your manager's brain actually fire.
Wait, really? Mirror neurons?
Yeah, so it causes them to feel hesitant about your value too. You're basically infecting them with your own lack of confidence.
Wow. That makes total sense. So how do we stop that from happening?
To build genuine confidence, one of the most effective tactical strategies is to physically write down a highly specific time you successfully advocated for yourself in the past.
Like negotiating your initial job offer, or maybe securing resources for a tough project.
Exactly. When you write it down, you are forcing your brain to retrieve actual hard data on your own competence. You are short-circuiting that self-doubt before you even give anyone else a chance to say no.
And speaking of self-doubt and hesitation, I mean, we really have to address what the data says about the gender gap in these scenarios. The research across our sources is pretty stark.
It is. Women notoriously avoid asking for raises until it is absolutely necessary.
Yeah, the data shows they often wait until they are practically drowning in new responsibilities before initiating the conversation, whereas men tend to ask consistently, taking the plunge with far less hesitation.
It is a deeply ingrained systemic issue. But the immediate tactical takeaway for you, the listener, is this. First and foremost, you just have to make the appointment to ask.
Just get it on the calendar.
Exactly. Even if the timing isn't perfect or you don't think you'll get a yes today, simply initiating the conversation puts you on the radar. It establishes a baseline.
Okay, so getting on the calendar is step one. But looking at the data on timing, when is the best time to actually launch this boat? Tying the ask to a formal performance evaluation seems like, the most logical choice. Because the floor is already open for feedback, right?
That is certainly the path of least resistance. During an evaluation, your contributions are already the focal point of the discussion. However, timing is ultimately about aligning your ask with moments of high visibility.
And positive momentum, I assume.
Right. So right after you have delivered a major project win, or when the company has just announced strong quarterly earnings, the end of the financial year is also highly strategic because that is the exact window when budgets for the following year are actively being finalized.
Yeah, let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Yeah.
Because my anxiety is telling me this assumes a traditional in-office environment where your boss actually sees you working late or, high-fiving clients in the hallway.
Proximity bias.
Yes, proximity bias is incredibly real. How do you successfully ask for a raise when you are literally just a square on a screen and you haven't had a casual face-to-face coffee with your manager in 6 months?
It is a very common fear. But the counter-argument from workplace strategists is incredibly firm here. The work is still the work.
I really like that. The output hasn't changed.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Do not let a virtual or hybrid setup talk you out of advocating for what you deserve. Many employees actually work significantly harder and are more productive in remote environments.
Because there are fewer office distractions, yeah.
Exactly. The medium of delivery has changed, but your value hasn't. The difference is that in a remote setup, you can't rely on passive visibility. You have to be deeply intentional about making your impact visible to leadership.
Which brings us to the actual preparation phase.
Yeah.
You can't just schedule a meeting, log on to the video call, and rely on good vibes.
No, definitely not. You need an arsenal of hard data. If you walk into your review next week without a specific, well-researched number, you are making a fatal mistake.
You really must have a data-backed figure in mind. You need to identify your true market rate.
Because going into a negotiation without a research number is kind of like letting the real estate agent set the budget for your new house.
Well, that's a perfect analogy. If you don't drop an anchor first, they will gladly set the anchor for you. And gravity is just going to pull your salary down to their baseline.
The psychological mechanism you were talking about is literally called anchoring. The first number thrown out in a negotiation subconsciously sets the parameters for the rest of the conversation.
So if you let them anchor low, you spend the entire meeting fighting just to get back to average.
Exactly.
So how do we find that anchor? I mean, where do we get the data?
Well, it requires utilizing aggregate tools like Glassdoor or PayScale, sure. But more importantly, it requires having real, transparent conversations with your industry peers. You need to know the going rate for your exact position, location, and experience level.
I know that asking peers about their salary is, well, it's traditionally seen as this massive workplace taboo, but it really is the only way to get accurate real-time data.
It is.
But here's where I see a lot of people trip up, and it connects to what the sources call the I need it trap. People constantly confuse personal entitlement with business need.
Oh, I've seen that happen so many times. It is a very easy trap to fall into, especially when the cost of living is rising so quickly.
Exactly. An employee will go in and say, I deserve a raise because inflation is at an all-time high. Or, I need a bump in pay because my rent just went up 20%.
And while that is incredibly stressful for the individual, using it as leverage is a guaranteed way to derail the conversation entirely.
Let's explain why that derails it. Your manager might be deeply sympathetic to you as a human being, but in that room, they are acting as a representative of the business.
Right. A business simply cannot justify a budget increase based on your personal overhead. If a manager goes to HR and says, we need to give them $10,000 more because their rent went up, HR will just say no.
The entire conversation must be rooted entirely in your value contribution.
It's a harsh reality, but it makes total sense. You are getting paid more because you are doing more, or because the quality and efficiency of what you do has increased dramatically. You are a business investment.
It is a purely value-based transaction, which means the burden of proof is on you to demonstrate that value.
And I love the tactical advice in our sources on exactly how to prove that value. They talk about building an internal brand using what they call the forwarded compliment strategy.
Oh, yes. Third-party validation, it is incredibly powerful.
It really is. The strategy is super simple. If a colleague from another department or a difficult client sends you an email praising your work, you don't just say thanks and move on.
Right. You say, I'm so glad the project was a success. Would you mind dropping a quick 2-sentence email to my manager sharing that feedback? It would really mean a lot to me.
And let's look at why that works so much better than just bragging about yourself in your review. When you tell your boss you are doing a great job, their brain naturally applies a filter of skepticism.
Because of course you would say that.
Exactly. But when a peer or a client says it, that skepticism vanishes. It bypasses their defensive filters completely.
So when you walk into your review, you aren't just bringing a list of personal opinions. You have a documented paper trail of evidence from the wider ecosystem of the business.
Okay, so we have built our case. We have our market data, our third-party evidence, and we know our anchor. But delivering that data without triggering a defensive reaction from the manager is honestly the real tightrope walk.
How do you structure the opening of this conversation so they don't immediately, cross their arms?
You have to prime the room. And the most effective way to do this is by detaching the you from your opening statements.
Break down the mechanics of that for us. What happens when we use you statements?
When you start a difficult conversation with a phrase like, I want to be honest with you, or I need you to understand my perspective, the word you instantly activates the amygdala in their brain.
It triggers a mild fight or flight response.
Right. Subconsciously, they feel they are being critiqued or attacked, and they immediately go on the defensive.
So how do we bypass the amygdala?
You talk about the environment instead of the person. You say, I want to make sure this is a room where I can be transparent about my career trajectory.
Oh, that is subtle, but so effective. A room where I can be transparent. You have completely removed the individual from the crosshairs.
Exactly. You are framing the conversation around the organization's opportunities, not the manager's personal authority. Because the truth is, most managers do not have sole unilateral power over the departmental budget anyway.
If you make it an issue of their personal authority, they feel trapped. If you make it about your growth within the company's framework, they relax.
Now, once they are relaxed, the sources suggest trying to negotiate by actively asking them for advice. Things like, what would you do if you were in my position?
Let me push back on this a little because my initial reaction to reading that was, doesn't that risk making you look completely incompetent? Like you don't know how to navigate your own career.
It is a valid concern, for sure, but it actually achieves the exact opposite. It relies on the psychology of mentorship and ego.
People universally love giving advice.
Because it makes them feel wise and respected. When you ask your manager, how would you navigate getting to the next compensation tier if you were in my shoes? Oh, you are stroking their ego.
It turns a potential confrontation into a collaborative mentoring session.
You are actively recruiting them to be your advocate, handing them the map and asking them to help you plot the course.
But of course, as you plot that course, you have to prove why the trip is worth taking. I noticed the experts placed a massive emphasis on forward-looking ROI, return on investment.
A critical distinction. A lot of employees spend their entire salary review listing out what they did 6 months ago. But a raise isn't a reward for past behavior.
Right, a bonus is a reward for past behavior.
Exactly. A raise is a financial investment in your future output.
I was looking at the case studies in our sources, and the examples of forward-looking ROI were fascinating. The successful employees weren't just saying, I did a good job on the last campaign. They were actively pitching future value.
Like what?
They were saying things like, moving into the next quarter, I plan to take the lead on all new vendor negotiations to reduce our departmental overhead. Or, I've identified 3 inefficiencies in our software licensing, and I plan to streamline those systems to save us 20 hours a week.
They are literally showing the manager how paying them more will ultimately save the company money or generate more revenue.
That is exactly how you justify the investment. You give them a business case, not a personal plea.
All right, I think we need to put this psychological framework to the test. Let's do a role play.
Oh, I'm ready. I will be the employee, armed with my market data and forward-looking ROI, and you be the manager whose budget is getting seriously squeezed.
I've sat on that side of the desk many times. Let's do it.
Okay, here we go. Hi, thank you so much for making the time today. I want to make sure this is a room where we can be totally transparent about my career trajectory here.
Of course. What's on your mind?
Over the past 12 months, I've taken on the onboarding process for all new Tier 1 clients, which has reduced our churn rate by 15%. Moving forward, my goal is to also take over the quarterly training modules, which will free up significant bandwidths for the senior team.
That sounds great.
Based on my research into the market rate for these expanded responsibilities, I am looking for a salary adjustment into the range of $85,000 to $90,000.
Well, first of all, I really appreciate your hard work on the client onboarding. The drop in churn has been incredibly helpful. However, 85,000 is a pretty significant jump from where you are now.
I understand.
Looking at the current Q3 budget and the overall financial climate, the absolute best the department can do right now is a standard 3% cost of living increase. I'm hoping you'd be comfortable with that.
I completely understand that departmental budgets are tight right now, and I appreciate the offer of the 3% bump.
Glad we're on the same page.
Unfortunately, a 3% increase doesn't quite reflect the market value of the new responsibilities I've absorbed, especially the Tier 1 client management. Given the documented ROI I'm bringing to the team and my commitment to taking over the training modules next quarter, I would really ask that we look closer to that $85,000 mark. How can we get there?
If I'm being completely honest, my hands are tied by finance until the new fiscal year starts in January. I literally do not have the discretionary funds to approve an $85,000 baseline right now.
Okay, I appreciate that transparency regarding the timeline. If an adjustment isn't possible in this current cycle, what specific measurable metrics do I need to hit between now and January to guarantee that salary adjustment when the new budget's open?
And Finn, excellent job. You navigated a very common, very frustrating series of roadblocks perfectly.
Thank you. It's nerve-wracking even in a role play.
I bet. But I want to highlight the single most important tactical maneuver you pulled during the very first phase of that role play, right after you dropped your anchor of $85,000 to $90,000.
I know exactly what you're going to say. It was the hardest part of the entire exercise.
You stated your range, and then you zipped it. You literally stopped talking.
The silence. It is agonizing. 5 seconds feels like 5 hours.
In the negotiation world, they call it landing the plane. You make your proposal, and you land the plane.
The cognitive dissonance of that silence is wild. As the person asking, your brain is just screaming at you to fill the void.
Yet it wants to alleviate the tension.
If I hadn't forced myself to stay quiet, the anxiety would have made me say, 85 is the goal, but, whatever you think is fair, I really just love working here. I would have negotiated against myself before you even had a chance to respond.
That is exactly what happens 90% of the time. People undercut their own anchor out of sheer nervousness. But let's look at why silence is so effective on the manager.
Because it makes them uncomfortable too.
Partly, but mostly because when you stop talking, you shift the cognitive load entirely onto them. They now have to formulate a thoughtful response.
Right.
And studies show that allowing that silence to sit, even if it's 3 or 4 agonizing seconds, actually comes across as highly confident and collaborative rather than aggressive.
You let the silence do the heavy lifting. Now, the silence worked well in that scenario, but my anxiety is telling me that in the real world, people sometimes resort to nuclear option.
Oh, like what?
I've had friends tell me the only real way to get a raise is to secretly interview, get a higher offer from a competitor, and then basically slap it on your boss's desk. Match this, or I walk.
Wow. Okay, leadership experts universally consider that an incredibly dangerous strategy. Issuing an ultimatum triggers that amygdala response we talked about earlier, but on a massive scale.
It's basically a threat.
It is. It might get you a short-term bump in pay because they're desperate to avoid a sudden gap in the team, but it completely destroys your long-term loyalty capital.
Like basically put a target on your own back.
Exactly. If you hold a metaphorical gun to your manager's head, you are officially on their mental list of people who are a flight risk. The second the company needs to downsize, you are the first one cut because they already know you have one foot out the door.
So what do you do if you actually do have another offer, but you genuinely want to stay at your current company? How do you use it without threatening them?
You frame it as a collaborative problem to solve.
Give me an example.
You sit down with your manager and say, I was recently approached by recruiters with an outside offer for significantly more compensation. I haven't accepted it because I truly love this team and I want my future to be here. But the discrepancy in the market rate did make me wonder, and I was hoping you could level with me about my earning potential here.
Oh, that is brilliant.
Yeah.
It isn't insulting, and it isn't an ultimatum.
Not at all.
You're basically saying, the broader market values me highly. I want to bring that value to you. Help me understand how we make the math work.
Right. You are giving them the opportunity to step up and retain top talent rather than backing them into a corner.
And it seamlessly pivots to the exact strategy we used at the end of our role play. If they say the budget is completely frozen, you don't just accept defeat and walk away.
No, you pivot to the timeline.
You ask what specific targets you need to hit for future promotion. You ensure that even if the answer's not today, you leave the room with a concrete roadmap for tomorrow.
You keep the kayak moving forward.
Always steering. Okay, let's unpack everything we've covered today because we've dismantled a lot of conventional wisdom. We started with the inner game negotiating with yourself to eliminate the hesitation that triggers doubt in others. We discussed anchoring your ask in hard market data rather than personal financial needs, and relying on third-party validation to prove your value. We talked about priming the room to avoid defensive reactions, handing your manager the map by asking for advice, and of course the agonizing but essential power of silence.
It's a truly comprehensive psychological toolkit.
So if our listeners are walking into their manager's office tomorrow morning, what are the 3 actionable tips they absolutely must apply?
Number 1, do the math before you walk in the door. Research your true market rate so you can drop a confident anchor and build an undeniable evidence file of your forward-looking value contribution.
That's great. And number 2?
Number 2, prime the conversation. Bypass their defensive triggers by framing the discussion around the environment, and recruit your manager by asking open questions like, what would you do in my position? Turn them into a mentor.
And number 3?
Number 3, state your requested salary range clearly and then land the plane. Literally stop talking. Shift the cognitive load and let the silence do the work.
It sounds so simple, but holding that silence takes incredible discipline. Just zip it.
It really does.
We spent this entire deep dive figuring out the mechanics of how to get you a raise, but I want to leave you with a final thought, a totally different perspective to mull over.
Oh, I'm intrigued.
Think about what happens when these tactics actually work. You get the raise, you hit the metrics, you get the promotion, suddenly you move up, and you find yourself sitting on the other side of the desk.
Ah, I see where this is going.
You become the manager. You are the one dealing with constrained departmental budgets and pressure from HR. When your employee walks in, sits down, and confidently drops an anchor for a higher salary, are you prepared to be the one holding the paddle?
That is a fantastic question. It really changes the way you view the entire process. A great manager actually wants to reward their valued employees.
It definitely does.
Yeah.
Thanks for navigating this with us today. We'll see you next time.